At 1 in the morning, my daughter collapsed at the door, her eyes bruised and her lips split. Sobbing, she confessed to me, "My husband beat me. Because of his mistress." I held her in silence, helped her into the house, and without a word, I put on my military uniform. Ready. I loaded the bullets, then dialed my lawyer's number. "Start the plan. Now." I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I had just turned off the TV and let myself fall onto the sofa, my eyes half closed after a long and exhausting shift. Being a police officer in this town wasn't always life or death, but that day I had to break up a fight at the Longhorn Saloon and then write the report until the early hours. My body felt heavy. I just wanted to sleep deeply. Outside on the street, the barking of dogs mixed with the buzz of motorcycles as the neighborhood kids sped by. It was already 1 in the morning, but the neighborhood refused to sleep. The kids are probably on the corner, smoking and drinking a few beers, like every night, I thought. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the noises so my head could rest. Suddenly, a series of urgent knocks sounded at the door, so loud they made me jump. My heart raced, and my police instincts kicked in immediately. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? I walked quickly to the entrance, gripping a chair tightly, just in case. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice a little shaky, not from fear, but because I felt something bad was happening. No one answered, just a couple more knocks, weaker this time, followed by a choked, trembling voice. "Mom, open up, please." I nearly froze. It was Sarah's voice, my daughter. I unlocked the door in a hurry, my heart hammering in my chest. As soon as I opened it, Sarah collapsed into my arms, trembling like a wounded little animal. I hugged her tightly, feeling her limp body as if she didn't have an ounce of energy left. "Sarah, what happened to you, honey?" I asked, my voice breaking. The yellow porch light hit her face, and I froze when I saw her. Her lip was split, with dried blood at the corner. Her left eye, purple and swollen, could barely open. She was clutching her stomach with her hands, as if trying to hide a pain. "My husband, he hit me." "Because of his mistress," Sarah whispered, her voice choked, before breaking into heartbreaking sobs. I felt my blood boil, but at the same time, my heart clenched. My daughter, the one I raised and loved more than my own life, was in front of me, shattered. I helped her inside. I laid her on the sofa and ran to the kitchen for a damp cloth and the first aid kit. "Stay still, honey. Let me see," I said, trying to stay calm, though inside I was a wreck. I carefully cleaned the blood from her lip, but it kept coming, red, vivid, as if it were cutting my own heart. The cut was deep. It wasn't just a wound on the skin. It seemed to carry a much deeper damage. Sarah kept hugging her stomach, her slender hands trembling. I gently removed her hands, lifted her blouse, and, my God, I almost dropped the cloth. A huge bruise, black and purple, covered her abdomen, as if she had been hit not once, but many times, viciously. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if the blows had been dealt to me. "Sarah, who did this to you? Was it Dominic, wasn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage and pain. Sarah didn't answer. She just cried, and her sobs broke the silence of the house. Without another thought, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart for the town's emergency room. "Dr. Evans, please get ready." "I'm bringing my daughter over," I said, rushed. My car was in the shop getting the brakes fixed, so I called a taxi. While we waited, I sat next to Sarah, covering her with a blanket so she wouldn't get cold. Her cell phone, which she had left on the table, kept lighting up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 7 missed calls from Dominic and some messages that appeared on the locked screen. "Open your mouth if you want to lose everything, you bitch." I felt the blood rush to my head. I reached out to grab the phone. I wanted to see more, to know what else he had done to her. But Sarah, though weak, snatched it from me in a panic. "Mom, don't look. It's nothing." She looked at me with eyes full of fear, as if just by touching that phone, everything would come crashing down. I didn't press her. I just squeezed her hand to reassure her. "I'm here, honey. Nothing is going to happen to you." But inside, I knew this had already gone too far. When the taxi arrived, I helped Sarah get in, supporting her with one arm while awkwardly carrying a bag with the other. On the way to the hospital, Sarah was hunched over, her head resting on my shoulder, repeating over and over, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Every word she said was like a stab in my heart. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her whole life, and now she had to come find me in the middle of the night, shattered by the man she had once trusted. The taxi stopped in front of the hospital, where the cold, white light of a neon sign illuminated the words "Emergency Room." I helped Sarah get out, my daughter who could barely stand on her own. Her body was still trembling, and she clutched her stomach, as if holding on to her last bit of strength. I squeezed her hand, trying to keep her from feeling how my own heart was racing. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered, though I was terrified too. Dr. Leticia Evans, who was on duty, was already waiting for us at the door. She looked at Sarah, then at me, with a concerned expression, but said nothing. She just motioned for a nurse to take my daughter to an examination room. I followed her, my feet feeling as heavy as lead. When the nurse took off Sarah's thin jacket, I almost gasped. Besides the bruises on her face, her shoulders and wrists were covered in marks of cruelty. Purple and reddish bruises, like silent accusations. I stood there, motionless, holding onto the edge of a table, containing the rage that burned inside me. "What did this bastard do to you?" I thought, but I didn't dare say it out loud for fear that Sarah would start crying again. Dr. Evans carefully noted each injury, her face serious. "We need to do an X-ray to see if she has any fractured ribs," she said, in a grave but steady voice. I nodded without saying anything, just watching Sarah lying there, her eyes closed as if she wanted to escape reality. While I waited for the results, I went down to reception to sign the treatment papers for her and pay a deposit. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I recognized it immediately. If someone was calling at this hour, right after Sarah arrived at my house, it could only be Dominic. Rage flooded my head, and I hung up without even answering. He didn't deserve to talk to me, not after what he had done. When I returned to the room, Sarah had dozed off, likely from exhaustion. I pulled the blanket up, my hands still trembling. Seeing her face, I remembered the Sarah of before, the cheerful girl who used to run after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me." Now that smile was gone, replaced by wounds and fear. I sat by the bed, watching her sleep, my heart in pieces. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her, and I had let her fall into the hands of a guy like Dominic. I blamed myself, but at the same time, a flame of determination began to burn inside me. I couldn't let my daughter keep suffering. Never again. After they put her on an IV and she stabilized, I took Sarah home. I made her a glass of warm milk, left it by the bed, and closed the door softly, making sure she was asleep. It was almost dawn, a faint light seeping through the window. I went out to the front porch to tidy up a bit and saw Mrs. Miller, the neighbor across the street, sweeping her yard. When she saw me, she hurried over, her voice rushed. "Did something happen at your house last night, Elizabeth?" I heard knocking and some crying. I sighed and briefly told her that Sarah had been beaten by her husband, that he had kicked her out, and that she had to seek refuge with me in the middle of the night. Mrs. Miller gritted her teeth, her eyes blazing. "How dare he treat his wife like that? That man has no shame." I nodded, saying no more, but I felt I had an ally. Suddenly, I remembered that Mrs. Miller had a camera at her entrance. "Say, Mrs. Miller, did your camera happen to record anything last night?" I asked. She nodded immediately, opened the app on her phone, and showed me the video. I recorded the scene of Sarah at my front door with my own phone, knocking desperately, her faint cries echoing in the night. Seeing that image made my heart ache all over again, but at the same time, I knew it would be a key piece of evidence. I took Mrs. Miller's hand and thanked her from the bottom of my soul. She just patted my hand and said firmly, "Don't forget to get justice for that girl. I trust you can do it." I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my police uniform, hanging impeccably. The blue shirt, the khaki pants, the belt and holster, it all seemed to be waiting for me. I took each piece, feeling the rough fabric under my fingers. In silence, I changed, buttoning every button, adjusting the belt. Every movement was like an oath. I wasn't just Sarah's mother, I was also a police officer, and I would use everything I had to protect her. When I finished, I picked up the phone and called James Ellis, the family lawyer. His voice sounded sleepy on the other end. Hello? I was brief. James, start the plan. Right now. He was silent for a moment, then asked, Elizabeth, are you sure? I replied without a second's hesitation, completely. Get ready. I hung up and went to the living room, took my digital camera from a drawer, went to the bed where Sarah was sleeping, carefully removed the blanket, and began to photograph each of her injuries, the split lip, the bruised eye, the bruise on her stomach. Every time the flash went off, I felt I was documenting not just the physical wounds, but also the deep damage to her soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining room table and spread out all the papers and the USB drive with the video from Mrs. Miller's house. I connected the drive to my laptop and carefully backed everything up. Sitting there, watching the screen light up, I knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. I had entered a war, not just for Sarah, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. By the time I finished backing up the video from Mrs. Miller's camera, the clock read 8 in the morning. Sarah was still fast asleep in bed, her face swollen and her lips dry and cracked, as if even in her dreams she couldn't escape the pain. I quietly went into the kitchen and prepared a bowl of chicken soup. The smell of onion and herbs filled the air. I brought the tray to her bed and woke her gently. She opened her eyes with a tired look and was surprised to see me there, dressed in my police uniform. Mom? She murmured, then shook her head. I'm not hungry. I sat beside her, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible. To be strong and move forward, you have to eat. Sarah looked at me with watery eyes and reluctantly took the tray, swallowing with difficulty. Seeing her like this squeezed my heart. Just a few years ago, Sarah was a radiant young woman, always smiling, filling the house with joy. Now she was here, broken, a shadow of her former self. I decided to take her back to the hospital for another checkup. The bruise on her stomach worried me. Dr. Letitia Evans received us in the emergency room, her face serious, but she didn't say much. She ordered a CT scan to make sure there was no internal bleeding. While we waited for the results, I sat in the waiting room, took out my laptop, and connected the USB drive. The video appeared on the screen. At 1:02 in the morning, Sarah was at my front door, knocking desperately, her muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Seeing that image made my heart ache all over again, as if I were reliving that night. I copied the video to an external hard drive, protected it with a password, taking care with every detail. I knew what I was doing was not just to protect Sarah, but to build a wall of evidence against Dominic. Just then, Sarah's cell phone rang. The screen read Dominic Gallo. I felt my heart stop. I grabbed the phone before Sarah could react and immediately turned it off. Sarah looked at me, terrified. Mom, if he finds out I talked, he won't leave me alone. Her voice trembled, as if the mere mention of his name plunged her into darkness. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to calm her. I'm here, honey. Nothing is going to happen to you. But I said no more. I just silently looked at the clock. It was almost 10 in the morning. I took the SIM card out of Sarah's phone and put in another one I had prepared. I didn't want him to find her. I didn't want him to have the chance to threaten her again. The CT scan results came back a few minutes later, confirming that Sarah had several severe soft tissue contusions, but luckily no internal bleeding. I let out a breath, but the relief was momentary. The wounds on Sarah's body would heal, but the ones in her soul, I knew, would need much more time. I took her home and called James Ellis, the lawyer. I have the medical records and the video from the neighbor's camera, I told him bluntly. He scheduled a meeting at his office in the afternoon to gather the evidence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Miller came over to see us with a pot of still hot chicken broth. This is for Sarah to get her strength back, she said, with her warm voice. If you need a witness, you can count on me. I looked at her, feeling her sincere support, and my heart felt a little stronger. In the afternoon, Sarah tried to rest, but she would wake up startled from nightmares. I sat beside her, trying to calm her, but she just babbled in fear. Dominic pushed me, and Denise. She was in a corner, mocking me. Hearing that, I felt the blood rush to my head. "Who is Denise?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Sarah told me, in a weak voice, that Denise was Dominic's mistress, that she had come to their house several times, shamelessly flaunting herself, provoking Dominic to take it out on her. Her story was like a knife in my heart. I had eaten at the same table as Dominic. I had thought he was a decent man who would take care of my daughter, and now it turned out he was not only cheating on her, but letting another woman humiliate her in her own home. Sitting by the bed, I took out my cell phone and took close-up photos of the bruises on Sarah's wrists, including the watch, so the exact time would be visible. With every photo I took, I felt I was documenting not just the physical wounds, but the pain my daughter was carrying. I knew these photos would be evidence, but they were also a reminder of what I had to do to protect her. In the afternoon, I took Sarah to James's office with a portfolio containing all the evidence I had gathered. He opened it and laid everything on the table: the photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB drive. James nodded, his voice firm. "This is a pretty solid foundation. Now we just need to prove the public adultery, and he'll have nowhere to run." I clutched the handle of my purse, knowing perfectly well what my next step was. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a police officer, and I would use everything I had to make Dominic pay. That night, I didn't take Sarah to my house. I didn't want her to be in a place where Dominic could find her. Instead, I left her at Mrs. Miller's, my trusted neighbor. She opened her doors for her to stay the night and promised not to take her eyes off her. I returned home alone, my heart heavy. I took off my police uniform and put on an old jacket and jeans, trying to look like an ordinary person and not an officer looking for evidence. I took the digital camera from the drawer, checked the battery and memory card, and went out in my old car. Every turn of the wheels reminded me that I was entering a war, not just for Sarah, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. I parked the car in a dark alley near the Longhorn Saloon in San Antonio, the place Sarah had told me Dominic frequented. The bar's neon light illuminated a patch of the street. I sat in the car, hunched down, camera in hand, waiting. Around 8 at night, Dominic's silver pickup truck appeared, its headlights sweeping the alley. My heart raced, but I remained calm and turned on the camera. Ready. A few minutes later, a woman came out from around the corner. She was wearing a tight red dress, her lips painted a bold color, a cigarette in her hand. She walked with a provocative confidence. I recognized her immediately. It was Denise Stone, the woman Sarah had told me about, Dominic's mistress, the one who had made my daughter suffer. Dominic turned off the engine, got out, and opened the door for Denise, putting his arm around her waist with familiarity. Seeing him, I felt my blood boil. Him, the one who had sat down to eat at my house, the one who had called me his mother-in-law, was now hugging another woman while my daughter lay in a bed full of bruises. I snapped the camera again and again. The neon light from the bar clearly illuminated their faces. Every photo was like a stab, but also another piece in the puzzle I was assembling to unmask him. I followed them at a distance to a small motel with a flickering red light sign. I didn't get close, I just stayed far away and took a couple more photos of them entering the lobby, hand in hand. Then, I went around to the parking lot and took a picture of the license plate of Dominic's pickup, making sure a nearby digital clock showed the time. Every photo was a bullet, and I knew I held in my hands what would leave him with no escape. When I got home, I opened my laptop and transferred all the photos to a special password-protected folder. I called James, the lawyer, with a determination I couldn't hide. "I have the photos of his infidelity. You can see their faces. You can see the license plate," James responded with a firm voice. "Excellent, Elizabeth. Keep them safe. Don't let him know you have them." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, feeling a little more relieved, knowing I was one step closer to justice. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was Sarah, calling from Mrs. Miller's number. Her voice sounded distressed. "Mom, he just called a friend of mine to ask where I am." When she told him she didn't know, he threatened her too. "I'm so scared." Hearing Sarah, I felt my heart clench. My daughter, even though she had escaped from Dominic, was still tormented by his threats. I calmed her down. "You just stay calm. Stay at Mrs. Miller's. I have him under surveillance." But inside, I knew I had to act faster, before he found a way to hurt Sarah again. I immediately contacted Captain Miller, a trusted colleague at the precinct. I presented him with all the evidence I had gathered: the video from Mrs. Miller's, Sarah's medical records, and the photos of the infidelity. "I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Mrs. Miller's house," I told him in a hard voice. Miller agreed without hesitation, but not without warning me first. "Elizabeth, what you're doing is very dangerous, but if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win." I thanked him and gave him a copy of the infidelity photos, in case something happened to me. I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I sat at the dining room table, organizing all the data into files: evidence of injuries, the camera video, and the infidelity photos. Each file was like an indictment, another step toward bringing Dominic to light. But in my heart, I couldn't shake the pain. I had once considered him a son, had believed he would protect Sarah, and now, not only had he betrayed her, but he had dared to raise a hand to her, to threaten her, all for another woman. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I thought of Sarah's bruises. The next morning, I took Sarah to see Dr. Anna Reyes, a psychologist James had recommended. Sarah needed help to overcome the trauma of the days of abuse. I stayed in the waiting room, my heart heavy, watching my daughter walk into the office, slowly, her shoulders slumped, was like a stone being placed on my chest. I, who thought I was a strong mother, a tough cop, had not been able to protect her from the man I had trusted. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I remembered Sarah's face full of bruises. As I sat there, my phone vibrated. It was Robert Alwyn, the clerk at the Public Records Office, whom I knew from some previous dealings. His voice sounded grave and a bit rushed. "Mrs. Morgan, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your daughter's on a deed transfer file. Something strange. If you have time, you should swing by." I frowned, not understanding what he was talking about. Sarah and I hadn't done any transfer paperwork, but a bad feeling made me get up immediately. I told Dr. Reyes I would be back for Sarah later. When I arrived at the Public Records Office, Robert motioned for me to come into his office. He opened a file, his brow furrowed. "There's something strange here. This land was transferred to a Denise Stone last week, but since you didn't call me to confirm, it seemed odd." I froze. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That can't be," I exclaimed, my voice choked. "Sarah and I never signed anything." Robert shook his head and pushed the file towards me. "The signatures are here, with your name and your daughter's, and the transaction is already filed." I took the paper and saw shaky signatures that looked nothing like ours. I immediately asked, "Who came to deliver these papers?" Robert replied in a low voice, "The clerk told me it was your son-in-law, Dominic. He said you had entrusted him with the transaction because you were busy." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Dominic had not only beaten Sarah, not only cheated on her, but he had dared to forge our signatures to steal the land, my father's inheritance, what my family had cared for years. I tried to stay calm and asked Robert for a photocopy of the file. He sighed. "Someone from in here must have helped him with the transaction." Before I left, he whispered, "Elizabeth, this is dangerous. Be careful that no one in the office knows I told you." I nodded, thanked him, and promised not to betray his confidence. But inside, I felt like I was walking on thorns. Dominic wasn't just a violent man. He was a manipulator, willing to do anything to get his way. In the afternoon, I picked up Sarah from her therapy session. She looked tired, but her gaze was no longer one of panic. I took her directly to James's office with the photocopy of the fake papers. James reviewed them carefully, tapping his fingers on the table, and said firmly, "This is the final nail in the coffin. Now we also have proof of fraud, enough so he has no escape." Sarah, sitting next to me, listened in silence, but her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, he dared to forge our signatures to steal Grandpa's land," she said in a trembling voice, a mix of pain and outrage. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength, but I was also fighting my own pain. That land wasn't just property. It was a memory. It was my father's sweat, something our family had cared for generations, and Dominic had dared to trample all over it, just for his ambition and his betrayal. That night I met with Captain Miller and gave him the copy of the fake papers. He nodded with a serious look. Your evidence is very solid. I assure you, he won't get away. I thanked him, but I still had a weight on my heart. When I got home, I locked all the documents in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock read almost midnight, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I sat in the dark, thinking about Dominic, about what he had done to Sarah, to our family. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and fueled me at the same time. I knew the time had come to confront him directly. There was no other choice. On Saturday morning, I left Sarah at Mrs. Miller's house, the safest place for her at that moment. Captain Miller had someone watching outside, and I knew she would be protected, but my heart was not at ease. I put on civilian clothes, an old jacket and jeans, but I hid a file in my purse with the evidence I had carefully prepared. The photos of Sarah's injuries, the video from the neighbor's camera, the hospital report, and the photocopy of the fake land papers. I drove my old car to Dominic's pawn shop, the place where he did his business and flaunted his power in town. Every turn of the wheels reminded me that this was not a simple trip, but an inevitable confrontation. The pawn shop was open. A smell of machine oil and cigarette smoke hit me in the face. Two of Dominic's henchmen were arranging things on the shelves and they glanced at me when I entered. One of them smirked. Look, the mother-in-law's here. I ignored them and walked straight to the back office, where Dominic was sitting, counting wads of cash piled on a wooden desk. He looked up and sketched a fake smile. What's up, officer mother-in-law? So bored you have time to visit your son-in-law? His voice was loaded with sarcasm, but I paid him no mind. I hadn't come to argue or chat. I placed the file on his desk. Each page was like an accusation. The photos of Sarah's bruises, the video from Mrs. Miller's camera, with my daughter's cries in the early morning, the hospital report detailing her injuries, and the photocopy of the fake papers he had dared to sign for me and for Sarah. Dominic glanced at them. His voice quickly regained its air of confidence, masking it with a contemptuous smile. So what about these little papers? I've got better lawyers than you do. I looked him in the eye, my voice cold. I didn't come here to argue with you. If you want to see who's right, we'll see each other in court. He shot up, his voice restrained, as if I had wounded his pride. Who's going to dare touch me? Who's going to go against me in this town? I didn't flinch. I stared into his arrogant eyes. I will. Don't think everyone is afraid of you. The two guys at the entrance tried to approach, but I put my hand in my jacket pocket, letting my police badge show. They stopped dead, their gazes shifting away. Dominic turned red, slammed his fist on the table, and almost shouted, Your daughter is weak. She deserved to be taught a lesson. And you, don't think that badge is always going to save you. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. He dared to say that Sarah, my daughter, whom I loved more than my life, deserved to be taught a lesson? He dared to justify the bruises, the night Sarah had to flee in pain? I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to lunge at him and grab him by the neck. But I restrained myself. I didn't respond. I just silently gathered the file, put it in my bag, and turned to leave. Before I left, I turned back and said firmly, Just so we're clear, from now on, the rules of the game have changed. You're not the one who's going to be teaching anyone a lesson. The law is going to teach you. Dominic shouted at my back, If you walk out that door, you stop being my mother-in-law, and then don't complain if I get nasty. I stopped, looked at him one last time without a hint of fear. Well, consider that, from now on, you are no longer my daughter's husband. I walked out into the street, where the wind kicked up dust from the dirt road. I got in my car and immediately called James. It's time to file the lawsuit. James responded with a calm but cautious voice. All right, get ready. He's going to retaliate with everything he's got. I nodded. Though he couldn't see me, my heart as cold as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my confrontation with Dominic at the pawn shop, rumors started to spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early in the morning, I went to the market for some vegetables, trying to act normal, but the whispers reached my ears. Two ladies at the corner stall were whispering. That Sarah probably made it all up. They say she talked back to her husband a lot. That's why he hit her. I walked past them, and they fell silent. But their gazes followed me, as if I were the one causing trouble. In the cafe next door, an old man sipped his coffee and shook his head. Elizabeth is using her badge now to screw over her son-in-law. Hearing that, I felt like a dagger was plunged into my chest. These people, who greeted me every morning, who smiled at Sarah when she was a child, now so easily believed Dominic's lies. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, trying not to let them see my eyes welling up with tears. At noon, James called me to his office. He placed a stack of papers in front of me, his voice grave. Dominic just hired Hector Vance, a lawyer from the city. He's filed a countersuit. He says Sarah made everything up to extort him, and that you are abusing your authority as a police officer. I took the lawsuit. I saw Vance's signature in blue ink, still fresh. The words on the paper were like direct accusations against Sarah and me, as if we were the bad guys, the ones trying to ruin Dominic's life. Sarah, sitting next to me, turned pale and said in a trembling voice, "Mom, he's trying to make me out to be a liar." Seeing her, I felt my heart clench. Sarah, my sweet daughter, now had to endure not only the bruises on her body, but also the slander of the man she once loved. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength, but inside I felt an indescribable pain. I had thought this town, where I was born and raised, would be on our side, but now it seemed the whole world was turning its back on us. In the afternoon, I took Sarah to Mrs. Miller's house. As we passed through an alley, I saw Dominic's 2 henchmen standing there, smoking, staring at us. One of them lifted his chin and said sarcastically, "Be careful, people around here believe Dominic more than you." I didn't answer. I just squeezed Sarah's hand and hurried her into the house. But those words were like stones thrown at my heart, making me feel more alone than ever. I immediately called Captain Miller to inform him of the threat. He promised to increase patrols at night, but his voice also sounded worried. "Elizabeth, be careful. That guy is trying everything to turn the situation around." I nodded and thanked him, but inside I knew I was walking a very dangerous path. That night I went to the corner store to buy something to eat. The owner, an acquaintance of many years, pulled me into a corner and whispered, "Elizabeth, be careful. People are saying all over that you made everything up to take the land from your son-in-law." Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. The people who had been my neighbors, with whom I had shared stories, now believed I was a schemer. I thanked her, tried to smile, but as I left the store, I felt like the world was crashing down on me. When I got home, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under the door. Inside, a note with scrawled handwriting, "Shut up, or you lose your daughter." I took the paper. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I was furious. Furious that Dominic dared to threaten my daughter. Furious that the people around me were so easily manipulated. I carefully saved the note in the evidence file, knowing it would be another piece to unmask him. Late that night, I met urgently with James in his office. He saw the threatening note and nodded slightly. Good. The dirtier he plays, the more tangled he gets. But public opinion is on his side. We need a strong blow to change things, and the only one who can do that is Denise. Hearing James mention Denise, I felt a small light of hope ignite in the darkness. Denise, Dominic's mistress, could be the key to turning the situation around. But at the same time, I knew that getting her on our side wouldn't be easy. I stood there, in the dimness of the office, thinking of Sarah, of the bruises on her body, of the lies that were suffocating us. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and fueled me at the same time. I was not going to let Dominic win. I was not going to let his lies hide the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the pawn shop, I found out that Denise used to frequent a small bar at the end of Hidalgo Street. I knew it was my chance to change the course of the game, to turn the tables on the hand Dominic thought he had won. I put on a baggy jacket and a cap, trying to go unnoticed. As I entered the place, the country music was blaring. Cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the smell of beer and tequila mixed in the atmosphere. I chose a table in a dark corner, sat down, and didn't take my eyes off the door. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Dominic's people to see me before I could talk to Denise. Around 10 at night, she appeared. In a short, tight dress, lips painted a deep red, and a cocktail in her hand, she walked with a confidence that seemed forced. I looked at her and felt a mix of rage and pity. This was the woman who had contributed to my daughter's suffering, but at the same time, I knew she was also just a pawn in Dominic's game. I took a deep breath, got up, and sat across from her. Denise raised an eyebrow, her voice defensive. "And who are you?" I didn't answer right away. I just silently placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a copy of the fake land papers Dominic had engineered, along with one of Denise's bank statements, full of accumulated debts and the risk of foreclosure. I looked her in the eyes and said, bluntly, "I'm Dominic's mother-in-law. If you stick with him, you're going down with him. But if you cooperate, you save yourself." Denise let out a mocking laugh, but it vanished from her face as soon as she opened the envelope and saw the papers. She turned pale, her gaze faltering at the sight of the forged signature on the transfer and the red numbers of her debts. I continued in a cold but firm voice. "The police captain already knows everything. As soon as the trial begins, you'll be called to testify for fraud, and you could even face a serious sentence. Is that what you want?" Denise was quiet for a long time. The hand holding her cocktail was trembling. She downed the drink in one gulp, as if to give herself courage, and then said in a shaky voice, "Dominic promised he'd give me a share of the land. He said everything would be fine, that I would have it all. But now I understand. He just used me." Hearing her, I felt a bit of pity. Denise, though wrong, was another victim of Dominic's manipulation, but I didn't let my emotions get the better of me. I looked at her intently. "You have one last chance to get out of this clean. Tell the truth at the trial. I'll take that into account." Just then, the bar door swung open and Dominic's two henchmen walked in. They looked around and their eyes locked on me, sitting with Denise. They approached, looking unfriendly. Without hesitation, I took my police badge out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "Want to try something? Go ahead." The dim light of the place glinted off the badge, and the two guys stopped, slowly backing towards the door, their eyes still full of hatred. Denise was breathing heavily, pale as a sheet, clinging to the edge of the table. I looked at her and said, in a grave but decisive voice, "See, Dominic can't protect you. He's just going to drag you down with him." Denise bit her lip. Her eyes were torn between fear and determination. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll testify, but you have to promise me I'll be safe." I didn't promise much. I just nodded. "If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can." I immediately called Captain Miller, told him the situation, and asked him to get a safe apartment on the outskirts for Denise to hide in. As I left the bar, I walked down the cold, dark street. The wind made me shiver, but inside I felt a great relief. I knew the battle had changed. Dominic had just lost his most important piece. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 5, when the sky was still dark. I went to the kitchen and prepared a light chicken broth. The gentle aroma seemed to want to calm the tension that filled the house. I took the tray to the bed, where Sarah was still sleeping. Seeing her there, her face still a bit swollen and her lips dry, squeezed my heart. I woke her gently, whispering, "Eat something, honey, so you have strength." Sarah opened her eyes, her gaze tired, but she nodded and sat up slowly. I helped her put on a long, light blue dress and put a thin scarf around her neck to cover the bruise that was still visible. I fixed her hair and said in a low voice, "You don't have to hang your head anymore." Sarah looked at me, her eyes watery, but she said nothing. She just took my hand, as if it were the only way to feel safe. Outside the house, Captain Miller was already waiting with a patrol car. He greeted me with a nod. His look was serious but warm. "I've arranged an escort, Elizabeth. Everything will be fine today," he said. I thanked him, feeling a bit of relief knowing I wasn't alone. On the way to the courthouse, I saw the townspeople gathered in the square whispering. Some looked at us with curiosity, others nodded slightly as a sign of support, but there were also those who shook their heads with mistrust. The rumors Dominic had spread were still floating in the air, and I knew that today's battle was not just against him, but to reclaim the truth. When we arrived at the courthouse entrance, I saw Dominic. He was standing there in an impeccable suit, his face red and his gaze as sharp as a knife. Next to him, the lawyer Vance seemed calm, but I knew he was tense. Denise was also there, standing far from Dominic, with her arms crossed and her gaze lost. Seeing her, I remembered the night in the bar when I convinced her to switch sides, and I felt a spark of hope. But I knew today would not be easy. I took Sarah's hand and led her into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed. The old wooden benches creaked as people settled in. I saw Mrs. Miller in the back row. She nodded at me to give me encouragement, as if to say she would always be there, supporting us. Judge Arthur Cole entered, and the whole room stood up. The air felt thick. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan, like the heartbeat of the room. The lawyer, James, began. His voice was deep and confident. He presented the case. Each piece of evidence was laid out before the court. The photos of Sarah's injuries, the report from Dr. Evans detailing the lesions, the video from Mrs. Miller's camera that recorded Sarah's cries in the early morning, and the copy of the fake land papers that Robert Alwyn had provided us. When James projected the video on the screen, Sarah's knocks on the door and her faint sobs filled the room. I heard murmurs among the people. Some wiped their eyes. I looked at Sarah beside me. Her hands were trembling and her head was bowed. I put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed it gently, as if to tell her I was still there, that I would always be there. The lawyer Vance got up to rebut. His voice was sharp. Sarah invented everything to extort my client. Elizabeth Morgan abused her authority as a police officer to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers in my heart. I wanted to jump up, to shout that he was lying, that Sarah's bruises were not an invention, but James motioned for me to stay calm. He presented Dominic's threatening messages, which were clearly visible on the large screen. "Shut up if you don't want me to replace you." The room fell silent. Sarah lowered her head, her hands trembling even more, and I knew she was remembering the months she lived in fear. I squeezed her shoulder, trying to give her some of my strength. Then it was Denise's turn. She went to the stand, trembling, her gaze hesitant. "Dominic promised me he would give me a part of the land," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "He pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged. But the truth is, he forged his wife's signature to steal the land." Dominic jumped up, shouting, "You betrayed me!" The court guards had to force him to sit down, while Judge Cole said sternly, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Denise lowered her head but continued to testify. Every word was like a hammer shattering Dominic's lies. Seeing her, I felt a bit of relief, but I couldn't help the pain in my heart. Denise had been part of Sarah's suffering, but now she had chosen to be on the side of the truth. When it was my turn, I went to the stand and swore my oath to the court. I looked directly at the people, my voice firm. "I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. I will not allow anyone, not even my son-in-law, to destroy my daughter and mock the law." I pointed at Dominic, without a hint of fear in my eyes. "That man is not a husband. He is not a father. He is just an abuser and a liar." The entire room murmured. Some of the people who had believed in Dominic looked at each other, confused. I saw Mrs. Miller's gaze. She nodded, as if telling me I had done the right thing. Finally, Judge Cole stood up to read the verdict. His voice was deep and clear, but I didn't hear every word. I only knew that he was issuing a protection order for Sarah. He was freezing all of Dominic's assets, nullifying the land transfer, and sending the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of loan sharking and domestic violence. A roar of murmurs filled the room. Dominic slumped in his chair, his face pale, as if all his strength had vanished. Vance stood in silence, taking off his glasses to wipe away sweat. I took Sarah's hand and led her out of there. The midday sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whispering, "Elizabeth won, justice won." But inside, I knew this victory didn't erase the wounds Sarah had suffered. I just hoped that, from this day on, she could start to find her smile again. The afternoon of the trial, when Judge Arthur Cole finished reading the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I didn't catch every one of his words, but when I saw Dominic collapse in his chair with a pale face, I knew we had won. The ruling dictated a protection order for Sarah, froze Dominic's assets, nullified the fake land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of domestic violence and usury. When I took Sarah's hand and we walked out of the courthouse. The midday sun was shining on the steps, and I heard people whispering, "Elizabeth won, justice won." But inside, I didn't feel victorious. I only felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But the pain was still there, like a scar that would never fully heal. That same afternoon, the police went to Dominic's pawn shop to arrest him. People crowded the street to watch. Some whistled at him, others shouted insults to his face. I wasn't there, but the next morning, when the local newspaper published a photo of Dominic in an inmate's jumpsuit and handcuffs, under the headline, "Pawn Shop, Owner Arrested for Violence and Land Fraud," I felt something strange. It wasn't joy, it was a kind of liberation. He, who had sat to eat at my table, who had called me his mother-in-law, was now paying for what he had done. But that feeling was quickly replaced by sadness. I had trusted him, had thought he would take care of Sarah. The pain of being betrayed by someone in the family, like a slow fire, still burned inside me. Denise disappeared from town a few days after the trial. It was rumored she had gone to Houston to look for work, to start over. I didn't blame her. She had been part of Sarah's pain, but in the end, she had chosen the truth. Dominic's two henchmen, who called themselves the Devils, were also arrested for witness tampering. The neighborhood suddenly felt calmer. There were no more hateful glares or silent threats. But I knew the wounds Dominic had left in Sarah and me would not disappear so easily. Sarah moved in with me permanently. The first few days, she could barely sleep. She would wake up startled every night, sweating, screaming, "Mom, he's coming." In those moments, I would sit by her side, hold her hand and whisper, "It's okay, honey, you're safe now." But seeing Sarah, I saw myself years ago, when I too had remained silent in the face of my own pain. I took her to Dr. Anna Reyes, the psychologist, every week without fail. Dr. Reyes listened to Sarah with patience, helping her face her nightmares step by step. After a few weeks, I began to notice a change. Sarah no longer covered her face when she went out, no longer bowed her head when she passed through the market. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen making a chicken casserole, and as she folded the noodles, she was singing softly. That song, as gentle as the wind, made my eyes well up with tears. It had been so long since I had heard my daughter sing. It was as if the sun was beginning to enter the house again. The town also began to change its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted, who had believed Dominic's rumors, now greeted me. Some came up to apologize, their voices regretful. "Mrs. Morgan, we didn't know the truth." I would just nod, without resentment. I understood that Dominic's lies had been convincing, and not everyone has the courage to stand up to someone like him. Mrs. Miller came to visit with a tray of sweet rolls and hugged Sarah tightly. "You turned out to be stronger than your mother in her day." Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, as if the kindness of people still existed, despite the dark days. I continued with my work at the precinct. Every daily patrol was a reminder of my duty. Every time I encountered a case of violence, I felt more determined to help other women break the silence. Once, I found a young woman crying outside the station, her eyes red, clutching her purse. I sat down next to her and said in a gentle voice, "You're not alone. My mother went through it, my daughter went through it, and I too stayed silent once. But today, I know that silence only feeds the monster." The young woman looked at me. The tears were still streaming, but there was a new glint in her eyes. I knew I couldn't erase her pain, but at least I could show her there was someone willing to listen. A few months later, Sarah felt strong enough to go back to work. She got a position in an accounting office in the center of town. That night, she came home late, opening the door with a radiant smile. "Mom, I got the job." I stood up and hugged her with all my might, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain, but of joy, of liberation. Seeing Sarah there, smiling like the sun, made me remember the little girl who used to run after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me." I knew the wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to move on, to find herself again. That night, I sat on the porch, the wind blowing cool. I remembered the night Sarah collapsed at my door, her face full of bruises, telling me in a trembling voice what Dominic had done to her. I remembered the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments when I thought I would break under the lies and mistrust of the whole town. But then I looked at Sarah's smile today, and I thought, justice sometimes takes a while, but when it comes, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future. I took a sip of my coffee, now cold, but I felt a peace in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah had come back, and I, though I carried the scars of the past, had found a reason to keep fighting, not just for my daughter, but for all the women who need someone to stand up for them. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We do not tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I am genuinely curious. If it were you, in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.